Now, Statistics South Africa has announced that the rate of unemployment has increased to 27.6% in the first quarter of 2019, and that's up half a percentage point from the fourth quarter of 2018. Stats SA says that a decline in employment was seen in all sectors. A total of 237,000 people lost their jobs during the first quarter of this year. The construction sector lost the most jobs, 142,000 there, whilst the least job losses were shed in the manufacturing sector with 14,000 losses. Now, the numbers of discouraged workers increased by 156,000. Economists had predicted that unemployment would increase during this period owing to slow economic growth and rampant load shedding seen in the first quarter. Well, let's break down those numbers a little bit and the implications with the Chief Economist from Nedbank, Dennis Dykes, who joins me now via Skype. Dennis, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program. So it wasn't a surprise that we were not going to get great figures, but they are a lot.
Yeah, unfortunately, not great figures at all. What's disturbing is that one of the reasons why you normally see unemployment go up in the first quarter of the year is because the labor force expands, and that's mainly because of school leavers and university leavers coming into the workforce. But in these numbers, they actually came off slightly, and despite that, we saw unemployment rising quite significantly, and the weakness was very, very widespread. As you mentioned, also, we had discouraged workers going up, which again means that people are exiting the labor force simply because they don't feel that they've got a chance of getting a job.
All right, and is it still the same suspect, a weak economy?
Well, yes, unfortunately. I mean, if you got growth, which is barely going above 1%, and we think in the first quarter, in actual fact, we had a contraction in the economy, but overall, we're growing at, barely 1%. You're just not likely to see any sort of investment spending and any sort of jobs growth under those sort of circumstances. So something obviously needs to be done, and I think that something needs to be a little bit of a rolling out of the red carpet for businesses, both foreign businesses who might want to come and set up shop in South Africa, but also local business, to get that balance, that risk-reward balance, which is so necessary to create jobs and to create economic activity.
So what is unique about the South African economy when we start to compare with other developing nations that seem to be doing fairly well, actually?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, we've been a big underperformer, particularly since around about 2013 or so. And we've also been in the top 10 of high unemployment countries in the world, which is very, very sobering, and that's been over a long period, 10 to 15 years. So there is something very, very abnormal, and obviously, I think if you want digs down into it, we can't blame the global economy because everyone is faced with the same sort of circumstances. So it really comes down to, I guess, policies and the structure of the labor market. And those sort of issues. But what's very clear is that we've got a very significant problem. And if you've got a big problem, you've actually got to have big solutions. And we haven't really rolled those out, unfortunately.
All right. So a lot of people were saying that, look, we saw The Economist and other commentators saying, if Cyril Ramaphosa wins this election, we get the kind of certainty that we need and that things should kick off. Are you optimistic that perhaps now that all the variables are now known and we can push on from here?
Yeah, look, I think getting the election behind us is a very important factor because there were all sorts of horror type of predictions about what might actually happen. Coalition governments, big swings to the left, all those sort of issues which would have absolutely killed jobs and investment. So I think just getting it out the way is a very positive thing. But I think that does need to be followed through with business investment encouraging policies. And that, economists are always talking about policy certainty. They're always talking about, and that's a very difficult thing to actually achieve especially with a government that seems to have almost like a bit of a pull and a push here and there, but we never seem to be moving off the spot. So things like mining legislation, economic empowerment legislation, which is of course essential, but we need to actually have much more of a longer lens to actually see where it goes, because people are investing over a 10, 20-year period and they want to know what the future actually holds.
So when we start looking at the sectors, which ones do you think perhaps if we focused our attention much, much more might be able to deliver some jobs quicker than the others?
Yeah, look, I think in the short term, the big opportunity would be services, and in particular tourism. So, I mean, it's hugely disappointing that we've had the solution announced by the president a year ago, and we just actually haven't seen any real traction as far as that's concerned. So there have been a lot of things laid on the table about new visa regimes and e-filing and all that type of thing as far as visas are concerned. But we've just got to streamline that process and make South Africa a very easy destination to come to. A lot of countries, there's no fuss, no bother. You arrive at the border and you pay a visa fee and you enter the country. And, if we're going to compete with countries like Thailand and Turkey and those sort of countries, you really actually have to have a very attractive, easy entrance for tourists. And I think South Africa is way, way, way below capacity when it comes to international tourism.
All right. So talking about international interest, we often talk about FDI and the need and desire for it. A lot of these foreign investors have been waiting for queues. And will we start to see these foreign investors, do you think, coming into the country, or do they still wait for the next cabinet and then wait for the ratings agencies and keep on pushing this decision down the road?
Yeah, look, I think the cabinet composition now is going to be absolutely crucial. The ministers in the economic portfolio in particular will have to actually be people who hopefully have some sort of business experience or some business canniness, so that they know what people are actually looking for. Because as I say, up until now, what we've done is instead of rolling out the red carpet for new business, we've actually rolled out a list of requirements for them to comply with before they come here. And that's just not the way the modern world works. If you want to actually have business, you actually need to not necessarily supply investment incentives, but people need to know what the policy regime is. They need to see stability, and they want to actually know that they can, that the risk is fairly low in that country, and that they can make good rewards. Otherwise, unfortunately, you never know the amount of business that you're actually losing. And that's the sort of scene that we've been in over the last little while. So I think cabinet composition is very, very important. And then beyond that, obviously, a very quick change in the investment regime, because I think people will want to actually see those sort of policies put in place where they can actually, which inspire confidence. So, for example, last year we had the investment conference. Business came to government and said, we're going to commit to these sort of investments in the future. What I'd like to see this year is an investment conference where government commits to business on policies, which makes us a lot more attractive, and ask business, what do you actually require for you to come here, rather than actually putting out the requirements themselves.
All right, and perhaps as a final question, so the figures that have come out today are for Q1. We've already passed the line for Q2, and I can't think of anything that might give us a sense of optimism for the Q2 figures whenever they come out. Or do you think that, is it going to be the same, worse, or maybe there might be some improvement? What's your gut feeling of what Q2 is going to look like?
Well, look, these numbers do tend to be fairly volatile, so it's difficult to say exactly. But as you know, the economy was pretty much fed in water during the course of this quarter. We had the elections still. People were still bruised from the load shedding. So I think there'll probably be a bit of a wait and see sort of attitude. But I'd be very surprised if we see big improvements in employment for another 2 quarters at least. And then hopefully we'll start making a dent in this very, very big mountain.
All right, so Dennis, we're going to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed. That was Dennis Dykes, who's the Chief Economist at Nedbank, sharing his thoughts about those very difficult figures that we need to process about unemployment up to 27.6%.